All right, we should be live on Facebook and YouTube. I'm going to do some checks to make sure everything is working as it should before we get started this morning. We're going to be talking about some history, and we're going to be talking to a historian who has done a lot of great work in research. So let's see. I'm going to go ahead and check we'll be live on the Mildred Westervelt Warner Transportation Museum's Facebook page, which looks like we are live there. And I want to make sure that we're live on the Gorgas House Museum. So if you want to watch it on the Gorgas House Museum's Facebook page, you can also do that. Looks like we're live and working there properly. And we also should be, if you do prefer YouTube over Facebook, which I know some people might, you can go watch this on the UA Museums YouTube channel, which you can find at youtube.com/UA Museums. So it looks like we are live there. So I guess since we're working properly, I guess we'll go ahead and get this started. Welcome to today's Museums from Your Home live stream presented by the University of Alabama Museums. My name is Rebecca Johnson, and I'm the Communication Specialist for UA Museums. And joining me today are Catherine Edge, Director of the Mildred Westervelt Warner Transportation Museum, and Brandon Thompson, Director of the Gorgas House Museum. And I see we have a guest with us today. So Brandon, would you like to introduce her?
I'd be happy to. Today we are joined by Dr. Hilary Green. She's an Associate Professor of History in the Department of Gender and Race Studies at the University of Alabama, and also the next Vaughn Professor of Ethics and Society at Davidson College for the 2020 and 2021 academic year. She is the author of numerous articles, book chapters, at least one book, I think with at least one or two others in progress, a member of several professional and civic organizations, and I could go on and on and on. Probably fill up an entire hour just talking about all of that. Some of Dr. Green's research and teaching interests include intersections of race, class, and gender, and African American history, the American Civil War, Reconstruction, Civil War memory, the U.S. South, 19th century America, and Black Atlantic. And once again, I can go on and on and on about some of these research interests as well. So today we're joined by Dr. Green, and we're going to talk about many of these research interests, many of these topics, and their application with the University of Alabama, the Hallowed Grounds Tour, and a few other things. So Dr. Green, good morning, and thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, and thank you for the ways that you've incorporated UA Museums and what you've done. So before we get started, I just want to remind everybody that if you're watching, you can leave a comment or a question in the comment section, and we'll have Dr. Green answer them. So if you have anything you want to share with us, you can do that. And just as a reminder, this is live, so hopefully our connections will stay good, but just be patient with us in case they don't stay so good. But hopefully we'll hope for the best on that end, because everybody's using the internet these days a little more than they had been in the past. All right, so how should we get started today?
Sure. I'd love to start off with a question, and then we can start a dialogue, and we'll go from there. And Catherine and I, we can take turns going back and forth in the questions. But yeah, you really just have a laid back conversation and talk about history and its application, some of your research interests. So what I really like to start off with, Dr. Green, is can you tell us a little bit about your background and how did you come to teach at the University of Alabama?
Yes. So I am, as I like to tell people, I was born and raised in Boston, Massachusetts, but my mother is from the Gettysburg area of Pennsylvania, and their family historically rooted in those communities on the Pennsylvania-Maryland border. And my father's family is from the South Carolina Low Country. So for me, every year we took vacations to Pennsylvania. That was a 9-hour drive in the car. Think about no AC in the car in the 80s and what that meant. Yeah. And a longer drive to South Carolina. So from Massachusetts. And so for me, I got interested in history to understand the history of my families in those both places, and being from Boston. So it was a way to understand my complicated family history. And on every trip, we always went to Gettysburg. So, and every time we were in Charleston, we were always at the Battery. So we have pictures of us going in a stroller all the way up to 18 at both of those sites, climbing over the various monuments. And so that helped me get drawn to the Civil War era. So in history in particular, but I was also pre-med. So history was a love. It wasn't my initial passion. And then, so I went to Franklin Marshall College in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where I would go to Gettysburg 3 times a year because we were close enough as a student. And then Tufts University in Massachusetts, where I really honed my love for public history, as well as museum work and doing that work because I was able to work on a documentary for American Experience during my master's level. And my advisor at the time, the late Gerald Gill, was a advisor on Eyes on the Prize and several other documentaries. So for me, I'm like, oh, history allows me to work on documentary in public museums, and I can enrich the education that my parents exposed me to. And then when I decided, like, okay, I can be a historian, don't want to be a doctor anymore, I'm going to be a historian, I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So completed my PhD there. I taught at an HBCU for 4 years, and then I came to Alabama. So for me, this is my 10th year after getting my PhD, and my 10th year teaching at a college level. And I just finished up my 6th year at Alabama.
Okay, well, yeah, that was a fun journey you just took us on, and I like to see how everything kind of coalesced to kind of bring you to where you are. And I'll probably reference this back when we start talking about trajectories into different careers because we work with so many students. But that's fantastic, and we touched on some of your research interests just in the introduction, and then also kind of what some of the motivations might be. But can you tell us a little bit more about your research interest and what draws you to these topics?
Yeah, so more broadly, I consider myself a 19th century historian. So, and I do US, but also the Atlantic world, because a lot of people with transportation, communications, it's the Atlantic seaboard that includes Europe, Africa, and the US. So that's why I always include the Atlantic world, because even in rural Alabama, they are aware of what's going on globally. So some of those global conversations come in, and the 19th century allows me to really explore some of those initial passions and questions about family and family history. So that was why I was drawn to the 19th century. And the other thing that was really drawn to was I see myself as an everyday person. And for me, I was like, well, how did everyday people like me, not the elites, not the leaders, experience this very complicated century? And how did they navigate these larger issues? How do they manage to have lives? So I wanted to see not just myself and my individual family members and the diversity, but the people I encounter. The everyday farmer, the everyday grocer, and these families that seemingly don't make the big history books, but they're still doing extraordinary historical things in their everyday. So for me, it's that 19th century, and I take a long 19th. So I do 1787 to 1920. So I always have to tell people I'm a long 19th century person.
That is a long 19th century.
It is. And also, one of the things I really like in doing that and exploring everyday people, I get to explore women and Black women, Indigenous women, white women of various classes. I get to look at children. I get to look at the age in different questions of age as people go through this time period. And so for me, it allows me to ask these questions of how do these people grapple with major events from childhood to their death in this century and this radical world being forged. And so for me, that's why there. And I've been really drawn to the African-American experience because the 19th century has slavery, has the Civil War, has Reconstruction. And I was like, there's something here. Let me get into this. And I really like the questions of freedom. So post-Civil War, Reconstruction era, how did society that really changed and mapped into the 20th century get forged there? Those institutions that get born there, what does that look like? And how did everyday people define what becomes America? And those key questions. So that's where I really look at.
That's fantastic. That's great. I love how you mentioned the richness and the depth of the individual person's perspective, because often our educational system, at least K through 12 and even introductory like college level courses, really only explore like the great person, the great man of history narrative. So you really miss the complexities and the nuances and the subtleties that really enrich our histories. And that's one thing, one aspect of your research that I genuinely enjoy reading about. So thank you for sharing that experience with us. So Catherine and I, we work with students all the time in our spaces as employees and visitors and researchers. And your students have done some incredible work, such as your Southern Black History students' short documentaries. Can you tell us about some of these projects and your work with your students?
Yeah, so one of the things why I started doing those short documentary projects and those more public facing ones, I wanted students to be able to think about their final assignments differently. And it's not just a grade, but how can they shape conversations and use their expertise to be civic-minded individuals, and also introduce them to some tools and skills that are employable. And it's really the employable part that I always have in there. And so the documentaries, the public exhibitions, those marketable skills, but also public history facing, that they're like, if you can put that on a CV or a resume and say, this is what my history class taught me. This is how I learned and can demonstrate strong communication skills, and also speaking skills. But also, too, this larger moment of connecting what I learned in the classroom on the 19th century to larger contemporary global issues and engage in those conversations with diverse people. So those documentaries on the Southern Black education history was to try to get my students to think about their research on the campus history and the town history of the civil rights movement, because all my students are always struck that they're like, we never learned this. Why didn't we learn this? And then they're usually like, well, how can we tell others who don't have the opportunity to be in your classroom? So these documentaries and public facing projects have allowed students to take ownership of the class and contribute in different ways that they didn't think they could contribute to. But yet also, too, I had to disguise in those final projects the skills that they're learning, and I can assess them accordingly, but they don't know that they're doing all this work in a clear way or kind of articulate. And in the end, one of the things I like about those documentaries, especially, is seeing the feedback and having the students get the feedback from the community. So it's an ongoing conversation. And so those documentaries are fun. The next time I teach the class, I'm gonna bring them back. So we're gonna do a version 2 of them. So that'll be really nice. And but it's hard to convince students that they can do it. And also at the same time, by the end, they're so on board. They're like, yes, we're doing this. And then see the final projects, because we screen them as a class and they can bring their friends in, and we have popcorn, and they are like a movie premiere. I'm like, well, this is here. And some of them have then learned and taken those skills and gotten jobs with them and been able to bring that into their professional lives post-college, and they can remember that more so than anything. So it's really to make sure that the learning's happening in different ways and trick the students to actually learn as well, but have public.
Whatever it takes. Yeah, whatever it takes.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I love that, because it blends not only the intellectual part of education, but also like the economic purposes of education. So you have those blending, and it is, education and history are ongoing processes and ongoing conversations, especially when you start talking about public history and letting students make meaning out of the histories they're actually working with. So yeah, that's fantastic. I look forward to seeing that research and seeing the documentaries come out again. So that was a lot of fun to watch and read about. So kind of along those lines, so your work has crossed numerous departments and institutions, including the museum. I've really enjoyed having opportunities to talk to your students when they come in. They ask some of the best and hardest questions, and they're super engaged, and they make me think critically about the interpretation and the presentation of the histories that we deal with, which is really rewarding, and it really spawns critical thought and critical thinking. So along those lines, when it gets to expanding interpretation and presentation of enslaved narratives, who else are you working with, and what types of projects are you developing?
Yeah, so one of the things now that I started this history, and again, it was a student that inspired all of this. So I have to say, sometimes students inspire you in the process. But for me, it was having these conversations at different levels, and the museums had been one of the early people on board with the research and the reciprocal nature of sharing back and forth, but also promotion. So for me, was identifying partners. And I see the Gorgas House as a partner in these conversations and being able to share across, but also using those tours and then encouraging students to go in. A lot of students walk by it, they have no idea of the history. So even if I could introduce that spark, that idea that this exists, and then going in, and then over the time that I've been here working with you and the previous director, those subtle changes, students who have taken the tour more than once are now seeing like, oh, we can see how these are being brought in. We're seeing the changes and that slow incorporation in there, but they're seeing progress. And they feel like they're part of that progress making as a current stakeholder. And so for me, identifying those projects has been identifying other professors who've incorporated the history in their classes, who start to use the museums more and use the built environment more. So Hilary Green in history, Julia Brock in history, people in social work. A lot of people in social work use the museum as well as the history that I've been doing on slavery to do that long history of race and the African-American experience. People in education, how do you teach this difficult history? And through the CARI initiative, which is the Creative Arts Research Initiative that just developed, I'm working with Laveda Harrison in music, and how to talk about that legacy more as someone who does music and reads spirituals, and connecting the afterlife of slavery of Jeremiah Barnes, who was enslaved at UA by Judge Washington Moody, enslaved playmate of Frank Moody. Then he works on campus for briefly. He leaves during Reconstruction, is one of the first educators hired by the city. He rises up to rank as superintendent. Booker T. Washington is a close friend because he educates all of his kids at Tuskegee. When Washington comes to Tuscaloosa, it's because Barnes invites him. And then they're in First African Baptist Church with Booker T. Washington, and it's President Abercrombie and a couple of faculty at UA as the only white, pretty much the only few white invited guests in this Black church, created by former enslaved people, with Barnes as the MC. How do you talk about that rich legacy just from there? And I'm like, okay, I have the speech, I have this. I need a musician who can actually perform these songs because I can't sing. People don't want to hear me sing. How can I bring in this history? So those unique collaborations. And in the end, her goal is to recreate that, have it recorded, and if we can bring that in and make it more available and accessible, that people can go in and not just read about the speech, but hear it, see that recreation, and have those ongoing conversations. So one of the things that's been collaborative, it's really been finding allies, using talents, and having people take the parts and use it within their framework of instruction. So it has grown. So I have like some people there who are always doing the work and are always bringing in the history, but it also pushes me too, because I get like, oh, have you found more of this? What's that? So it has encouraged me to publish more, to try to get that information out that can be teachable, not in different levels of modalities. And then also too, how to present this information that can go across. And so digital humanities, museum work, that public focus that I've always had has helped a lot in thinking about who's my audience? What is this work? And expanding on things I already did with the Southern Black Education History course, the museum exhibit I had. How can we use this to really start having these, expanding the interpretation, but the variety of presentations and the variety of learning and deepening one's learning, and getting people on board in various ways so that they're introduced and then they can expand. And I have found that of the partnerships that I've had, it has been the UA museums and the Gorgas House that are instrumental in a way, because they go from there, now they're going into the museum. Now they're seeing the changes. Now they're learning even more, but they're seeing the spaces that enslaved people worked in, being able to visualize what they can't imagine. And it's that type of visualization with the tours and that you're just adding another layer. And I've been very appreciative of your work and Catherine's work in this regard.
Well, thank you. But I'll really say that thank you for integrating into our research and anything else you might actually be involved with. It's been a pleasure to be working with you. So yeah, this has been a lot of fun. And I like how you talk about really how these historic spaces, these physical spaces on campus, really serve as these anchor points for these types of collaborations. Not only, and they really span disciplines with history, museums, anthropology. We do work with the music department, but also theater and race and gender studies. There are all these intersectional points that you can really expand the meaning of these histories and let people really construct the meaning of the knowledge that really means something to them, but also explore those unspoken or forgotten periods of history. Because the Gorgas House, we have its mission, at least since the 1940s and 1950s, has been about the Gorgas family. And it is really a romanticized mid-20th century interpretation that really, at least early on, that's been expanded. In your work, the work of your students, the work of visiting researchers, bringing people into these spaces is helping expand our interpretation. We will always talk about the Gorgas family because that's part of its core mission. But we have an obligation and a responsibility and really a privilege to talk about everything else in this physical space. So it really serves as that intersectional point. So yeah, thank you. Yeah, keep sending students our way. That they drive our research and they ask the best questions. They make me think hard. So no, thank you. That's been a lot of fun. I hope we can keep doing it. So
I plan to continue because for me, I need to know where these people worked in, and having the Gorgas House is a rare gem, and I don't think people realize how much of a gem it is. And having that expansion and seeing what is here and how we're different from other campuses is really key. So what is unique about UA? The Gorgas House is a part of that uniqueness.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is a physical anchor to the histories of the university, and not only the university, but also provides links to the histories of the state and our country. And how do all of these things, how can you explore these histories in a singular physical space at the heart of campus? So it's a really unique opportunity, and one that I'm really enjoy exploring, that we can really explore these tough questions, but really deeply enriching and rewarding questions as well. So along these lines, we have to talk about your Hallowed Grounds project that explores the history of slavery on the University of Alabama campus. I know it includes archival research and walking tours. So can you tell us about what brought this project about? What are some of the experiences you've had during the tours? And what are some of the reactions to this project in general?
So I have to say there's 2 points of inspiration. The first was my on-campus tour visit during the interview process, and I saw the marker by the little roundhouse, and it had the word slaves on it. And as a historian of the 19th century, I always well, who are the slaves? If slaves, that alone was enough. How many? Who were they? What was their experiences like? But the project really came to the fore. My second semester at the University of Alabama, I had a Black male student take my class, and I was talking about slavery, and I was linking it to the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, where I received my degree that had a history of slavery, and the University of Virginia. And I know how those 2 campuses helped in many ways shape the University of Alabama. And I think he was questioning the content, like, why are we talking about this? Why this history? And he asked, well, he makes comment, and kind of question comments. But Dr. Green, slavery didn't exist here. And it was huh. So at this point, and this is late January of 2015, I had already started the initial search of who those slaves were in the guardhouse. So I actually stopped class and pulled up one of the digitized receipts of the UA libraries. And as a class, we went through and I'm like, okay, here's Basil Manley. Like, who's he? Who's this? What's this day? And we talked about the receipt and really started to talk about what does this mean? Here's this, here's a folder. But one of the things that came out of this, and I always tell and remark to family and friends and my students, I'm like, it only takes sometimes one time for a student to say something and the syllabus will change. So this comment, I was like, well, I'm going to have to teach this. So I like immediately went from a casual curiosity to in the archives. And that summer school too, I did my first iteration of the tour. And I purposely picked a Tuesday, Thursday class schedule. And like, we're going to walk this campus. We're not just going to talk about, we're going to walk this campus. And drawing on my work at UNC Chapel Hill that had an alternate campus tour, knowing about other campuses that are starting that history, I'm like, nope, we're going to use the landscape. And we're going to start with the Gorgas House because first building, we're going to start there and we're going to end at the cemetery, but we're going to be able to do this in an hour. And that's how it started. How it has expanded, though, it went from not just here's the specific sites of slavery and walking. Now it's who are the people who work at each spot. So using our archival work and telling the stories of people in those spaces. So at the Gorgas House, Moses and William. So it's not this abstract anymore. These were people who worked inside these spaces. The guard house with Neil, Crawford, and Gabe. And so really being intentional and expanding, but tying people to spaces. So now on the in-person tour, and you get some of those names. And having the paper version of the tour, which is on my website, that's there, is for people like my parents who are not tech savvy, who will print out a piece of paper and walk the campus. And
I still do that. I would still do that.
And then you have my students who are cell phone savvy, using Adobe Spark, which is an open source, free, and easy to use version that I can do. It took me less time to do the Adobe Spark version because I had the content. So dragging and dropping the images took the longest time of that. And so you see students on the in-person tour on their phones and on paper. And that history has expanded beyond this. And so early on, as I was digging into the archival work, I knew it just couldn't be about the tour. I had to make the documents accessible. And I started thinking about the tour and then as a project. So the tour is one part. The project has been including transcriptions of those primary sources at the Hallowed Ground site. And on other parts of my UA website, other materials so people can contextualize the African-American experience in my other work. But on the Hallowed Grounds project, you have some of the slave receipts and links to them. You have the HAB survey so they can get to the interior spaces. You have those documents about the financials. And being pre-med before, I could do a graph. So I did a basic graph of how you can get those information there. And it's really gone to, the tour is the entry point to the larger, more difficult history. And one of the hardest things to do is it's difficult to talk about slavery. It is not the easiest part to talk about because you have to talk about the dehumanization of people, money being exchanged, value being assessed, and trying not to see the money, but seeing the people on the document. And that's how using those financial receipts and finding the names, they weren't just the people exchanging money. There was a person involved, humanizing that story. So one of the things that has been how the reception is the first reaction, shock. This is the first time they ever had to grapple with this history. and in a way that it's not just like, how do you see a financial receipt and realize like, wait a minute, there's a building named after this person. I can see these ties. I know these, like, and there's space in there to sometimes, well, why aren't we talking about this more? To, oh, this is a person. What happened to them? So it goes through these, on the tours, you see this gamut of emotions. And so one of the things I have done, and I'm glad I'm a 19th century US historian who's used to talking about these materials and helping students grapple with this material, because in every tour, I'm helping people process. I'm helping people learn, and I make myself available at the end and during the tour for any questions. And it's usually like, how do we know if they're over in the president's mansion versus over here? What about those people not named? How are they not named, who cut the grass and do the facilities work? To some of those things. So one of the things I do is do this really, the overview and linking people so they can center on some people and spaces. The website helps them develop more and to read more and learn more. There's a bibliography on the site. They can then go and read. I have some of the primary sources in whole and digital collections that I have used. I have put those collections on the website so people can go in and then do more work on their own. And so making it experience that the tour starts something and then they can continue on. And then I receive a lot of emails, usually like, just thank you for your materials. Thank you for putting this stuff up here. And one of the things that has surprised me, honestly, has been I expected to receive pushback. When I started these tours, I was an untenured professor. The first person I asked was my chair. I'm like, are you okay with this? Like, is this okay? And I had my chair support. I had my dean support. I had my associate dean support. And it's an extension of my teaching. And it's not going outside of what I normally do in my public history work. But one thing I have done on the tours is a group of people that I don't always talk about, and those are women. So women on the campus had when we think about slavery and women, UA has it all. But how do you talk about the experiences of Lydia, Mary, and Sabra versus other women like Luna? And this page that's shown on the website now that's here is, I had to think about the spaces where they worked, but also their life, the children that they gave birth to, but named. Like, my favorite child born on UA's campus is Mary's daughter, Binky. Binky, I know President Manley did not name Binky. That was Mary's choice in naming their daughter. But Binky survived slavery. So carrying Binky from here to post-war has been great, but acknowledging those people born, acknowledging those presidents, and decentering the violence. So it's not just this voyeuristic experience, but we can learn a little bit more about their spaces. And so for me, it's this delicate balance of introducing sensitivity of how I'm introducing the material, answering questions, but starting the conversation. And so I've now reached in person almost 5,000 people between guest lectures, my own tours that I do in my classes, and now public history tours that I do. And I always have to do at least one in the fall, one in the spring, because I get requests all the time. I have to have a microphone now because the mass of people and the strain on my voice, because I've seen it. I walk the campus in the heat like everyone else, and the weather's a part of the tour. So I'm like, enslaved people couldn't stand under this tree like we are in the shade. They were cutting that grass. Yes, it's hot. I'm hot. I'm sweaty. Think about those individuals in the rain. I will not do a tour if it's like thunder and lightning. I'm not going to kill people. But light rain umbrellas, well, they're out there walking in the rain too. They're carrying and going between. So using the built landscape plus the weather, given that sensory material. And we actually walk the campus. So that walk-in process, you get to see the geography of the campus through different eyes, and then bring in the people's voices. So the project is expanding. The digital site will, my goal is to post-sabbatical, is to apply for a grant to make it into full out digital humanities sites. And one of the goals I would like to do is find an individual to help me recreate the campus that no longer is there, using those models of the buildings that we have in our collection, and make that virtual. And then insert some way the people who were there but are not real, that we can't see anymore. So the people cutting the grass, the people who are going back and forth, inserting those voices there, but getting people to think about the landscape then versus now. And the other thing that I plan to do is to write a book. I know too much now. And for me, it's not just going to be slavery at the university. That's the starting point. It will go into post-emancipation. So I have been able to, because of my research interest and my focus, I can now follow people into freedom. So I have the wills of about roughly 10 to 15 individuals. I know when they died, what they did, the institutions they were responsible. So really bringing into that Reconstruction, Jim Crow. And even if I go through up to the life of Jeremiah Barnes, who we know worked at UA, and then post-war occasionally is hired as a Mason before he goes into education and politics. He dies in the 19 teens. So even if I go to his death, I'm still at the edge of the 19th century, and then going into that Jim Crow era. So following those communities of freedom and really deal with that afterlife of slavery, that's common in the slavery scholarship, emancipation scholarships. They talk about slavery and then the afterlives. What happened to the people? What are those legacies, those complexities of those legacies? So for me, it is, so I want to bring people not from property, but actually into freedom and how their relationship with the campus changed. And probably I will end it with the stand at the schoolhouse door, probably, and use that as the last chapter, starting with that and kind of do a ramp up of, okay, this is how the campus changed from here to here. This is what it looks like, but really end, that is going to be the real ending point. Because I'm like, we know that history, but how do we get up to that history?
Yeah, there's a lot to break down and digest there, and I can kind of go off lots of different dimensions. And I'm going to come back to the stand of the schoolhouse door a little bit later. But you know, we address some of these issues really based on your research and research of like our volunteers at Camilla Cantu, copious researcher. She's fantastic. Many of our students doing their own student projects, exploring these marginalized histories, these unspoken histories. So we've gotten a whole different wide range of reactions when people come in for different tours. Most people are really gracious, really understanding. We've had others who are defensive, and I think that's just part of the natural discourse and dialogue that you actually get from talking about these issues. So really a two-part question, you know, what are some of the reactions you've gotten based on your work? And how would you recommend, as a scholar or a student or just a layperson, how would you recommend approaching talking about aspects of history that are potentially sensitive or invoke emotions of defensiveness or deeply emotional topics to many people? How do you recommend talking about these issues?
Yeah, so and I will say it is difficult. Even just talk about 19th century U.S. history, you have like the worst of American history in there. Like, so I always try to get an environment where people are willing to share and talk as a learning community. And when I'm in the classroom, I have that space to do that. The tours I don't always have. And so I always introduce myself, give some basic ground rules type of thing. And I'm like, this is hard history. I'm not going to lie. This is very difficult. feel free to ask questions, but think about this as a space of learning and engagement, not defensive. No one's blaming this on anyone. And one of the things about the Hallowed Grounds tour and being a faculty at UA and students at UA, we're part of the current UA community. So we already have a passion for the place. We're constantly thinking about the future and the present. So how do we learn from this past to move forward? So kind of bridging that common interest there as much as I can. But there will always be individuals of the defensiveness. A couple of comments I've had, and it's largely been from some faculty members. Well, we gave them a marker talking about the slavery apology marker. Why are we talking about this? And I'm saying, like, well, it's important because we are all UA in the present. This is our history too. How do we engage this? And these issues and legacies still affect us. The other I have learned is for people, well, how many? What does this mean? And using those conversions and different things. I'm like, well, and being upfront and really using the documents. So I always bring in the primary sources as much as I can and drilling down on the people as much as I can. And one of the things is really diffusing, not the defensiveness, but diffusing the anger of not in feeling that the institution, by not really being forthcoming with the information, having from students at undergrads to grad students to alumni to people in the town, that they're being lied to by not hearing the history. So it becomes this like, no, it's okay. This is how, so it's that anger part, more so the defensive nature of it. And it has been one of the things about, and I think this is one of the reasons why, as a faculty member doing the tours and graduate students and professionals, we have more preparation than students sometimes do and who don't have that language. So it has been one thing that I constantly think about. One thing when I get those questions and some people want to be dismissive of the individual being defensive, I step in like, no, this is a solid question. So I say, like, it's okay that this question's being raised. This is okay that this is a feeling here. Let's work it here. And then we go forward. And also too, one of the things I have, and I always say at the beginning of the tour and at the end, I will stay as long as I can trying to answer any questions, because some of it is, I can see the body language. I can see that. And over time through the tour, they're realizing like, wait, this is more a history, not I have to be defensive all the time. I'm learning that learning process. But it is sensitivity to this aspect of this history and these topics and how to present is something from the very beginning I always think about. And I'm always prepared for the emotions. And the biggest one, honestly, has been the anger. The other thing is how I present the information. So by the end, by naming people, by telling their stories at specific spaces, one of the things I have found by the end, because I get people to repeat the names of the individuals, different sites. So they've, by the time they're done with the tour, they would have repeated at least 3 different times, 9 individuals' names. And I'm like, so how do we deal with this legacy in the present? And even the women, my students are like, oh, I'm going to graduate for Luna. I'm going to graduate for William. I'm going to walk by this saying, like, that's where Neil, Crawford, and Gabe is. And yes, I'm here. And look at that change and that progress over time. And it's been really interesting in going through this material and sharing it. But I'm always prepared for the defensiveness, the anger. And I've developed strategies by looking at some of the teaching difficult history material, the Howard Zinn project. How do you deal with these difficult histories, and really draw on my pedagogical training there. And just knowing that it's okay for people to feel this way and to think this way. By the end, if they hear something, allow for that space. But when I need to step in, like, nope, we're moving on, step in and move on. So being a facilitator of conversation has been one of the greatest things. And the other is seeing students now and individuals now take the tour numerous of times. So that student who said that comment, I have since seen him graduate from UA. He came back. He was briefly on staff and was working on his master's student. And in that process, he always recommended the tour to his friends and colleagues and recognized that individuals too can change. So it's okay to have that initial shock and different thing, but realizing that they don't always remain that way. They can change themselves with the history. And that's what keeps me going, and how to deal with these difficult topics, and knowing that they're learning too, can I see change over time as much as I can? And that's the goal.
Well, first off, thank you for all this. Thank you for the work. I think one of the most captivating things you mentioned, and something that we recognize, is that you recognize the humanity of not only the people you're talking about from the 19th century up into the 20th century, but you also recognize the humanity of the people you're actively talking to, and understand that whatever emotional responses they're going to have are valid for them. And it's going to take them time to process it, whatever way they may need, but is a recognition that they are people as well, and they need to process on their own way. And I think that's one of the most rewarding and captivating parts about the Hallowed Grounds project, is it's just the recognition of humanity. And it's really rewarding. So I recommend anyone go on the tour if you get a chance. If you can't make it, please tour your website. I'm going to diverge just a little bit. It's pretty much an adjacent issue. But there's a consortium of universities called Universities Studying Slavery. And I believe Davidson is a part of that consortium. And I think Georgia and South Carolina are as well. What would it take for the university to become a part of that? Because I know that's not something, I've looked into it a little bit, but it's not something we're actively a part of. When we have other members of the SEC doing it, what would it take for us, for the university, to actually be a part of this consortium?
That is a good question. It is actually a high level process. So it has to come from either the president or the provost level. But I can say UA is exploring it, and they're going through Dr. Taylor's office on that. So while we're not a member yet, I can see us moving towards that direction. But one of the things to be a member is having, okay, what is our mission? What is there? But it comes from the top level rather than individuals. But I know, and one of the things that has also helped me in this difficult conversation is that UA is moving into that direction. When I first came here, I would never have seen this as a possible outcome. Now, because of the different conversations had, because of the research, because of the people here, because of the responses, that's one of the things that is moving towards. And there's actually people through Dr. Taylor's office who are trying to make that work, who are starting to have these conversations like, what would that look like at UA? What kind of things will look like in those charges? And it's still in the initial phases. And it's not immediate. It could be immediate, but UA's taking the logical step, being methodical, going through this and then going forward and having clear direction. So I see it as something on the horizon, but not yet forthcoming. But what's interesting is this commission that was proposed and we're working through now was originally proposed with the apology in 2004. So it's just delayed. That's how I always say that. History delayed.
Okay. Okay. Oh, well, that's exciting. It's exciting to know that we're actually moving to be part of this organization. That's fun. Methodical is fine. I understand that. So the month of June has several historic moments in it I'd like to mention and get your thoughts on. And we mentioned this earlier, but the first is the stand in the schoolhouse door. This happened on June 11th of 1963, when Governor George Wallace stood in the entrance of Foster Auditorium to block the entrance of two African-American students, Vivian Malone and James Hood. So how are we, the University of Alabama community, coming to terms with this event? What is its legacy, and what more can we do to learn from this moment?
Yeah, so one of the things I will say is UA has done the markers and the memorials, the Hood Malone Plaza, the Autherine Lucy Clock Tower, the marker that's on the Foster Auditorium coming in that talks about that area was a huge, major first step. The second is the marker that's out that was done to authoring Lucy Foster, and having Foster there as the last living survivor of that civil rights pioneer generation at that space. And it was either her grandson or great grandson who pulled off the unveiling, having that generational response and having her and her dignified self with time expressing forgiveness, even of this difficult past, and is able to reconcile herself, and that her family still has ties to the schools as students and other things. And I think that step, those little things, the markers, having a scholarship named after her, those type of things are great. One thing UA can do better, though, is markers and monuments aren't enough. I still encounter students who have never been to the Hood Malone Plaza. In my Southern Black Education History course, we read B.J. Haller's chapter on authoring Lucy and the stand at the schoolhouse door. And we go to the tunnel where authoring Lucy was and read that passage in the tunnel. We go over to Hood Malone Plaza. That's the last place we go. And we talk about that and we discuss the reading, what happened there at the space. And for a lot, like the slavery history, they didn't know about this is here because it's outside of their normal walk on campus and their normal travels. So bringing and introducing that space earlier and regularly to current campus stakeholders, because on the official campus tour, which I have taken several times before people realize that I'm me, and then, now they recognize my presence. So, there's no stop on the tour, and I have watched the reactions of parents like, "Oh my gosh, we're going by this stop. There's no discussion. We passed Tutwiler. We're coming around the corner, getting ready to get off of Demi Chines." And I have seen parents like, "Wait a minute, I'm going by this site." So people know us for this. We go by. So how do you start with those official tours and say, yes, this is what we've done. We are now this diverse place at UA, and bring that in. And then also a tradition that is no longer, I'm not sure if it's done anymore in that space, but when I first came here, having convocation in Foster, using that space more often for people so they can see it early on and learn about that history. And I think we can do a lot more with signage, a lot more with the tunnel that exists, and like we put a lot of those decals on the wall. Can we do that with a timeline in that tunnel? Can we have some kind of virtual recreation, AR virtualization of that space? How can we make this more interactive, more engaging, more present, that people can really see how much UA has changed from slavery to this to where we are now? And I think that's one of the things, like, we need to sell this more and get people more on board. But one of the things I will always say is what has been done is the best first start. We have that. That's a starting point. How do we make it sustainable? And how do we introduce people earlier who are new to the campus? And not just the out-of-town tourists who come in specifically for that spot. But how do we introduce it to the current campus stakeholders and more engagement there? But I will say, like slavery, more people know about this than than here, but we can always do better. There's always room for improvement.
I like that. We're getting a little short on time, but there's two more questions I want to ask you, so we'll try and get them as quickly as I can. So the second event that I'd like to get your thoughts on is known as Juneteenth, which commemorates June 19, 1865, the day of emancipation of the remaining enslaved African Americans in the Confederacy. What can you tell us about the history of the state, its recognition, and its growth throughout the United States? Because it was recognized differently as it spread throughout the country.
Yeah, so this is a major event celebrating when people in Texas find out that they are free. And it really signals to how we take for granted communications. Like, because I'm like, things took a while to, especially as when I teach the 19th century, I'm like, yeah, the telegraph cut some time on how much it takes, and we take our phones for granted today. But it took a while for that news to get out to Texas. And so this is that celebration of freedom. And it was started really off as a Texas holiday and a celebration of Texan communities and some Gulf Coast communities. So because Galveston, from Galveston to Pensacola, Florida, there are steamers that are connected. So the Black communities are during post-war are all interconnected through steamer and their families. So you see some Juneteenth celebration because of migration in Mobile, in Pensacola, and usually in churches. But the date that they're all celebrating is their respective emancipation days, because that's what Juneteenth is. It's the Texans' Emancipation Day. Tuscaloosa, April 3rd and 4th was celebrated as Emancipation Day. Richmond's April 3rd. And then you have January 1st. So it was a super localized, somewhat slightly regional because of the Gulf Coast area. Then you have the Civil Rights Movement. And that's where Juneteenth, you see Juneteenth all over. So I say the Civil Rights Movement and the miniseries Roots, never underestimate those two things, because everyone wanted to learn about slavery because of Roots. Everyone wanted to learn about the Civil War and emancipation because of Roots. And then you had the film Glory. Mm-hmm. That just changes everything. So now Juneteenth is celebrated here. It's celebrated in Massachusetts. It's celebrated across the nation. And it's even international because of the diaspora. So it's this national holiday that used to be January 1st. And now it's Juneteenth that is really the one that is celebrated. And I think why January 1st, while in Washington still being done, it's been a church focused event. This one's like, okay, we can have two holidays. We don't have to have all the other ones. So some of those localized ones have fallen off, but in many communities. But Juneteenth and January 1st remains the two emancipation days that people will celebrate. So for Juneteenth, I will be reading the proclamation that was given to Texas freed people. I will do something on social media and just to remember, like, hey, it's Juneteenth Day, let's celebrate, and then go from there.
Well, thank you so much for the bit of history, and I recommend anybody follow your Twitter page. It's fantastic. There's a lot of incredible information there, so I recommend anybody do that. All right, really quick, last question I have to ask you, because we work with students all the time. How do you hope to inspire students through your work?
One of the things I do is I'm passionate about this history. I'm passionate about the people I learned. So helping to spread the passion that I have to others. So getting students involved in the research, having them touch the pieces of history of the primary sources that help construct those histories, engage them in different ways, but get students involved and interested. And they don't have to become a historian. That is fine. They don't have to research and share my research interests, but they can want to learn about the communities where they live. They want to know and be that civic-minded individual and informed citizen. So that means cultivating the spirit, going to museums, cultivating reading a history book that wins the Pulitzer, doing little things. I'm happy. As long as they have the language and tools to do that exploration.
Well, Dr. Green, this has been a lot of fun. This has been really rewarding and enriching. I feel like we could talk for another 3 or 4 hours and then have you back on next week, and we can still keep this going on. So yeah, we definitely got to do this again in the near future. This has been a lot of fun. So good luck. Have a great time at Davidson. We're going to miss you. We'll be in touch.
I'll be there.
We got your contact information. Yeah, we'll be in touch. We know where you're headed.
You know, if we have any questions about history, particularly about the Tuscaloosa Northport area, I know I got to email Hilary, and it's just it automatically happens because you are such a wealth of knowledge and have done so much for the community, both campus and greater community. And so yes, have a fantastic time. But we definitely will email you throughout the coming year. I miss you already, so. But you're gonna do great. I have no doubt about that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing all that information and for sharing your research and exposing people to some of the history that they might not know. Well, I guess that's going to do it for this Museums from Your Home live stream. We're going to be changing our live stream schedule a little bit because we've got some big summer virtual events that are coming up. So history, if you're interested in history, we're going to be doing this live stream on Wednesdays now instead of Tuesdays. So come back on Wednesdays because that's where we have moved that because of the virtual summer events. So definitely come back and hang out with us and learn more about some other history that we're going to be talking about. All right. So if you are interested in becoming a supporter of UA Museums and if you love history and you want to keep it going, you can go to give.ua.edu/museums. That's a good way to become a supporting member of the museums and support what we do with our programs. And if you want to keep up more with our video content, like our live streams here, you can go to youtube.com/UA Museums. Make sure you subscribe. That's a great way to be notified anytime we go live and anytime we post a new video. So definitely come and hang out with us next time as we discover history through different time periods and through different historians. And thanks to everybody who is watching today, and thanks to everybody who will watch in the future, because people will watch it in the future. But thanks to everybody who is watching and visiting UA Museums from your home. Well, we hope everybody has a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.